haven't been reading anything lately. Like, I've just been listening to podcasts today. But this is starting to become like a habit for me. So on my way home, I figured I'd just talk about books that have moved me and that mean the world to me, and that, you know, just ones that I like the most. So I'll start with one of my all-time favorite books that I could pick up and open to any page and be absorbed into it is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. He also wrote, I actually won an argument with a librarian once because he didn't believe that Joseph Heller had written this. He wrote a book called Pulp, which is, I remember a phrase in it. It's going to explain everything you need to know about the book. So it's this big fat detective, just this greasy detective guy. And he says, like, he's talking to this woman, and he's sitting down somewhere, and she tells him to sit somewhere else or something like that, or come over here. And he says, I picked it up, carried it over, and I dropped it. And that was his description of getting up and crossing a room and sitting down again. The entire novel is very unlike anything from Joseph Heller. It's really funny, and it's like, just like, I don't know, it's like Pulp Fiction. Like, if you would imagine what Vincent was reading on the toilet before he died, this is the kind of book you would think that Quentin Tarantino would have picked for him to have been reading. But Catch-22 is itself, I have the airplane tattoo, the B-25 bomber that shoot, how am I forgetting his name? Yossarian. That Yossarian flew. I think it's a B-25. Don't at me. My bad. I don't know my military airplanes and bombers and such, but I'm pretty certain that's what it is. And I left it blank so that I could write stuff in it, because I like to learn new words and things. Like right now I'm learning Bangladesh words, Bengali words or whatever, because there's this gas station chick that's from there, and so every time I see her, she gives me a new word. So I learned to say hello, and thank you is like Dunuba, Kamanacho is hello, and I guess mahalo, but I can't say it properly because apparently they're very close to China and they have a similar way of speaking where it flows like that. But anyway, I'm off on a tangent. Okay, so Catch-22 is the story of a young naval guy who's in the war with Korea, I want to say, but it might have been Vietnam. No, it doesn't feel like Vietnam. I think it's a Korean war. And it's just this, the Catch-22 title is about how he's trying to prove that he's crazy because he's legitimately going insane, but because everybody in any rational human being would feel like they were going insane in a war like this. So when he's trying to tell people he's insane, the chief commander or whoever is like, well, because you told me that, it means you're not crazy. And he's like, so in order for me to get out of this on a 5150 situation, I would have to have someone else tell me that I'm insane? And he's like, yes. And he's like, well, how do I get someone to say that? He's like, you have to tell them you're insane. He's like, but if I tell you I'm insane, that means that I'm not insane? He's like, yes. And that's, okay, where are you going, buddy? All right, let me get out of your way. All right, I'm sorry. God bless you. I hope everything goes okay. Okay, so that's Catch-22 in a nutshell. And it's got these incredible characters, and everything is like this ironic twist of fate with each story and each character. There's Milo Minderbender, and I don't know. It's just, I never don't have it with me. It's my go-to vacation book. It's my go-to I don't want to be here book. It's awesome. Another book I read, let's see, Joe Abercrombie. Anything he writes I'll read. And my first one that I read was about Logan Ninefingers, and it's very Game of Thrones-esque if you're into that. And it goes into these characters where you get to see the perspective of a kingdom from all different sides and angles of it. And Logan Ninefingers is kind of like a mercenary of sorts. He's a northerner, so he's supposed to be some sort of a barbarian. And it goes into the banking system and the corruption there and the kingdom and who's got their hands behind the throne type of thing, who's puppeteering everyone, and moral ambiguity and, road trip escapades, and it's just great. I love that. Let's see, what else? Whoa there, Bo, you good? Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's see, The Summer That Melted Everything. I can't for the life of me remember the author's name, but it's called The Summer That Melted Everything, and it's one of the books that I read when I want to, it made me want to write. It's a poetic prose type of book, but it's written from the perspective of a layman. So you get that kind of shallow wisdom, I'd want to describe it as, where the way the person puts things together and compares things, it sounds like high poetry, but through the mouth of a normal person that doesn't have any time for poetry. And it's this, the premise of it is, Autopsy Bliss is a father who writes in the newspaper a call for the devil to come to his town, Breathitt, Ohio, I believe it is. And somebody answers that call, but it's not who you would expect. And the whole story, it's kind of, you want to read it twice, honestly, because when you find out what's actually going on and who this devil person really is, and the reason behind his arrival, and whether anything is supernatural or if it's just the perspective of people that want to believe in the supernatural, it makes you want to read it all over again. It's kind of like, I don't know. I don't really know how to describe it. It reminds me of that book, When the Moon Was Ours. That's another very beautiful book, but it's hard to read on paper. It's easier to listen to an audiobook because the author likes to write in these long, melodramatic, kind of sing-songing, you don't know what's real and you don't know what's not real, and it's fine. And it's also got a great recipe for alfajores, which I didn't know anything about, but it's a Mexican pastry dish, like a cookie, almost like what are those fancy ones that everybody likes? They're not Moroccos. I can't remember what they're called. But anyway, it's like that. It's a very flaky cookie. It's really good. Also, it's fun because it's got a lot of Mexican culture, and it's almost like, I wouldn't personally consider it trans literature, but it's got trans issues that it presents and speaks about in a very honest and open way. That's kind of refreshing, especially for someone like me who's only been an outsider for these types of scenarios. Let's see. Philippa Gregory, she's one of my favorite authors. I'd love to do a video about some of her works. I started with The Lady of the Rivers. I believe it's her first in the series. And her novels are basically historical, but not entirely accurate, but predominantly accurate novels about England. So it starts off with the Joan of Arc eras, where the First Lady of the Rivers is apparently the mother of what we get with our Tudor lineage and stuff. But, so it's about King Henry VIII, about the War of the Roses and, King whatever the heck. But what it's like, you get to read it through the perspective of the women that were experiencing this, because nobody really cared about what they thought and how they interpreted things and how they dealt with things. And there's a few movies that have been made about this. The Other Boleyn Girl is the most popular one, but she's also got the Red Queen and the White Princess, I think, are also ones. And if I'm not mistaken, the White Princess is, I want to say it's Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, Mary's sister, because like if you were to read those three in order, it would be, I want to say it would be the other Boleyn girl, and then from that you would have the Red Queen, which is Bloody Mary, the daughter of King Henry VIII through his first wife, and then the third one would be the White Princess, which is the sister, half-sister through Anne Boleyn. And it goes into like very specific and personal, like how the people felt and what was going on at the time, and you know, like with the bloody war on religion that was happening. It's very fascinating. If you like the show Tudors, which I loved, I can't remember what the actor's name was that played King Henry VIII, but he played the guy from The Doors, and he in Morrison, and he played a bunch of other, you know, like he's got this way of doing his eyes. Let me see if I can do it. He has like something like that. I don't have his gift, but oh my goodness, he's just so enigmatic. And he plays King Henry VIII in that series from a very young, just kind of up and buckish boy king to like the end of the days where he's all like, you know, riddled with disease and, you know, I don't know. But yeah, Philippa Gregory, I've read her novels twice, and it helped me understand history. And that's one of my main things I really enjoy, is when I begin to understand history while having fun. And that's part of what I enjoy the Game of Thrones series and Joe Abercrombie's Bloody Nine novels. It's because, like, I know I'm learning fake history, so I'm kind of, like, wasting my time. I don't need to know this stuff, but it's, like, it activates that part of my brain that helps me remember things and helps me learn, so I don't think it's a waste. And that's Philippa Gregory. Like, there was a time I annoyed the hell out of this HR lady who liked English history because her family's English or British, whatever you call it. I don't know. I'm an American. I don't have to know. We're idiots over here, right? But I went through the list with her of every major leader from the Joan of Arc era all the way up to almost modern times because of these novels that helped me remember, like, who was the king during War of the Roses? What was his involvement there? Who was the subsequent king of War of the Roses when he failed? And which one was the one that killed the two little boys in the tower? Stuff like that. And it was like, that was Richard. Ha! I still remember. It's so cool. It's just fun. I wish I could find a book about American history that would make me move like that. So if anyone's got one, let me know. Let's see. What's another book that's near? Oh, Harry Bingham. That is a very different book than anything else I'm talking about. So, Griffiths. Fiona Griffiths is the main character in Harry Bingham's murder novels. And she's a young woman that suffers from Cotard's delusion, I believe it's called. I might be mixing that up with something else. There's two delusions I always get mixed up. One is a 100% fatal mental illness that is, the person believes themselves to be a dead person. They feel like a numbness in their body, and they can even start to hallucinate rotting flesh and decomposition. And the other one is the stranger syndrome, where a person will, my mother experienced this actually, they will feel that everyone in their lives that they have loved is a stranger. It's like a doppelganger replacement person. My mom had an experience like that when she was little. She was at a park with her family, and not to get too personal because it's not my business, but they were having a great day, which was a rare thing in her childhood. Everyone was having a good time, and she wandered off happily and just, did whatever little girls do when they wander off. And when she arrived back, everyone was fighting and screaming, and her mom and dad were like at each other's throats basically. And she remembered taking in the scene and saying, like, these are not my people. That's not my mother, and that's not my father. Somebody has replaced them with these ugly, angry people. And that's something that I think both are born of trauma, both syndromes or delusions. I mean, all mental disorders are essentially born of trauma. In my personal opinion, I think that you can have a predisposition to have a mental issue, but there's usually a trigger of trauma, or of something perceived as trauma, which can be initiated by the condition. So maybe I should shut up because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Anyway, Fiona Griffith suffers from the delusion of believing that she is dead. And she is a detective in, I think it is England, London, something like that. Somewhere in the UK. And she's able to almost identify with the dead because of her issue. So like when she sees a corpse on the table and they're like kind of like just done the autopsy, or they're doing it doesn't bother her, it doesn't gross her out, and she ends up like, there's a couple times where she spends some time with the dead person, and her grasp on time is so convoluted from her disease that she'll end up being there far past the time that she should have been able to recognize that she needs food and she needs to be outside in the world again. And because of her disorder, which is kind of frustrating because it's like mental illness is not a superpower, but I guess get it where you can. Because of her disorder, she's able to piece things together that other people couldn't. Or it's actually, you know what, I take that back. It's not really because of her disorder. It's more in spite of it, because I feel like the way her mind works and her amazing brain, she's able to make connections, almost like that show Psych with Sean Spencer, just like putting things together that other people miss. Very Sherlock Holmes-esque. She's able to put things together and find the answers that other people didn't even think to look for. And she's able to solve these murders, even though every time she does it, she breaks rules and she goes against the system, and she makes horrific mistakes and spends her entire savings on a funeral for one of the victims nobody knows this person, and she just feels like she needs to do this. So she's very like unstable, unhealthy. But it's I recommended it to my aunt, and when my aunt likes something that I recommend, it makes me feel like I've succeeded as a grown-up. So it's one of, I don't know, it's a really great series. Let's see, another one. I just had one. What was it? Shoot. Well, there's Christopher Moore. Alright, this is gonna sound really... If you hear vampires and werewolves like I do, and you're like, oh, forget it. This isn't like that. It's called, I think it's called Love Bikes and Making Friends, or Making Fiends, or something like that. He's got a series of vampires in San Francisco. I found his books because I was just looking for anything based in San Francisco, because I have a home calling there that, I never got over the fact that I was there. And this book has this series by Christopher Moore, the same guy that wrote Lamb. It's a very funny take on just the impracticality of being a vampire, and the impracticality of falling in love, or just being around people in general. And then there's like, somebody's trying to kill the world or something, I can't remember, and then these idiots try to get together and fix things, and you never know who's gonna die. So it's got a little realism there, because you'll really like a character and then they'll die. But then, it's like, it's just a wild ride, and it's so freaking funny. I can't explain to you how funny it is. It's just over the top. Cracks me up every time. I've read it a couple times too. Oh, I remember what it was. Okay, I can't remember the author's name, and I can't remember the book name, because I'm an idiot. My bad. But there's Maxwell is the main character. Maybe if I actually get some fan followings, you guys can help me remember what this is called. But it's okay if nobody ends up watching these, because I enjoy making them. So there's a history, it's like a history agency of time travelers. And this chick Maxwell, she's also kind of similar to Fiona Griffiths, just this like hard-headed, hard-ass person who just, you know, doesn't let her uterus get in the way, you know, and probably needs some therapy, but there's too much to do. And if I say this phrase, and anyone who's ever read this book, you'll know exactly what it is, and the world went white. So when they get in these time-traveling machines, that's what happens. The world goes white, and they arrive at the predestined place in time, and their job is to be archaeologists, kind of Indiana Jones-esque figures, but they're going to real time in order to acquire more knowledge and more understanding of the places that they go and the peoples that they are studying. And they're able to fund this endeavor by burying or hiding certain relics and historical things that are important and selling them to museums. And, you know, they dig them up in real time. Like, she gets to find, like, King Arthur's sword or something like that. It's awesome for anyone who likes history like me, and it's also just awesome for anyone who likes just really great stories with really colorful characters and a little bit of the techie nerdy stuff, as well as the emotional roller coaster of someone who like has a child and loses that child in industrial era London, and she has to contend with the fact that her child is going to be having a miserable life until she can get back to him. And there's a lot of stuff like that. There's so many good parts of this story. She goes and sees the dinosaurs. She gets to see Helen of Troy. She sees Nefertiti or Cleopatra. She describes her as not a beautiful person, but one of those people that has whatever it is that makes a celebrity. And it's just really, really fun, and I thoroughly enjoy all of her novels. My bad. I don't even know how to, just look up The World Went White and it'll bring up the book. I don't know. Obviously the Harry Potter series is really near and dear to my heart. I know I'm not supposed to like it anymore, but I've kind of removed myself from all of that. I separate the art from the artist, and me not enjoying something that isn't hurting me isn't going to change whether or not I appreciate the effort that went into creating it, regardless of how unacceptable the person who created it is. I'm not giving them any money or anything, so I just like them. It's just, I was a kid going through a lot, and I remember writing a letter to Hogwarts. Like, I wrote a letter to Dumbledore begging him to let me in. I just wanted to get out. But yeah, I know I need to read Percy Jackson as a person that really, but young adult stuff, it's hard for me to get into now because it feels too, I don't know. Let's talk Stephen King. The Stand was good. I really liked character development in that. He didn't really know who was going to become what. And yeah, that one got to me. I think I read fairy tales, anything by Stephen King, honestly. If I'm really just like looking for a book and I can't find one, it's a Stephen King. That's an easy go-to because there's so much I haven't read. I just finished a series of his short stories, and he's got one with a car that kills. Actually, he's got two with a car that kills, and both of them are short stories, if I'm not mistaken. And both of them are like, it doesn't fill you with dread or anything, but it's very like obscure foreboding. And it's just, I don't know, it reminds me of on Family Guy when they made fun of him for running out of ideas and him trying to like sell an idea to his publisher. And he's like, the next book is about a lamp. And the guy's like, alright, when can it be done? It's literally anything he writes, it's gonna be sold. Let's see. I haven't read The Goldfinch yet, but because I know it's going to make me cry. And I haven't read The Life of Pi because I know it's going to make me cry, and I just don't want to do that. I will, but not yet. But I read The Nightingale. Again, I can't remember the author's name, but if I had known what the book was about and where the book took place, I would not have read it, because World War II Germany stuff crushes my soul, especially me being, I guess, German heritage. Like, we've got a lot of Austrian in us, or Norwegian, or whatever. There's a lot of that dark humor in my family, and a lot of the trauma, but I don't think it's from Germany. We just got trauma in general. But all of it kind of, like, I remember as a kid, when I found out I was German, my first fear, like, I was learning about the Nazis in school, and I was like, what do I do with the knowledge that some of my relatives could be Nazis? And, like, I asked my mom about it. She's like, oh, no, our family, we're safe. Our family was here ages before any of that happened. We were in the Dakotas, like, chilling with the Indians. So, natives, sorry, I don't know what to call them. I mean, I feel like I have to, like, know all of their specific people group names, but I don't. So that's something I'm going to be learning in history once I get out of the BCEs. But The Nightingale is, okay, so, oh, and also, by the way, just because your family isn't a member of the people that concern you doesn't mean you shouldn't be concerned, because it still is, like, in my personal, I've done a lot of thoughts about this, and I've debated with a lot of people about it, and I think every single one of us is as susceptible of being a Nazi as anyone else. They were not a nation of stupid people. They were a nation of rational-minded people in chaotic times, and they were vastly manipulated, and I don't think any of us are above mass manipulation. So, I'm not saying Nazis are good. I'm not saying anything like that. But I'm saying it's dangerous to separate yourself from them as a human and pretend that they're monsters and that you're incapable of being a monster. I think that's the first step to being capable of being manipulated. But anyway, The Nightingale is a story about a French girl who's always breaking rules and she doesn't listen, and her sister's the good girl that does listen, and Nazi Germany occupies France, and her sister has a daughter, her husband goes to war, they're trying to get along with the Nazis, and the little sister ends up being one of those French heroes that they don't write about and we don't hear about, but she led expeditions to saving Jewish people and hiking these mountain trails that, like, nobody survived once, and she did it like 16 times to get them out of Nazi occupied France and into safe havens. And then she gets, well, I won't ruin that one for you. I know I ruin everything else, but that book, if I think about it, and I don't cry for people's love, I'm pretty unavailable emotionally, so I don't empathize with people's love stories, but the love story represented in there, the two love stories both hit me hard, like really hard, and yeah, it got me good. Let me think. Obviously Les Miserables. It's one, Victor Hugo, I want to say. It's one of the most beautifully written. That one and Grapes of Wrath. Those are two books that I have not finished, so I'm going to be honest with you. Because it's a big undertaking and my life is chaotic, but it's not because the books are boring. There's a scene in Grapes of Wrath in the very, very beginning where there's a flippin' turtle, and he's just talking about this turtle crossing this desert and walking and walking and walking, and it's so well written that that's interesting. A freaking turtle is interesting. And just like, what has to happen to a person to make them capable of expressing themselves in such a way that's that compelling about something that's that inconsequential? I haven't read a lot of autobiographies or biographies, but I did read Gandhi's. I didn't read it. I listened to it. I would never have been able to finish it, but it was beautiful and it made me want to be a better person. And there are some things that I took from it that helped me in my personal life and worldview. Because not like seeing not like how to understand Indian people or how to understand, but how to rationalize myself in every individual. Like, that's that Hindu thing. Like, you do every single task with the understanding that it doesn't matter if it's fulfilling. It's a duty, and you just do it because that's what your lot in life is, and that's fine, and nobody promised you happiness, but you can achieve joy through perfection or through the attempt of perfection. I don't know. I'm clearly not his target audience, but it was a great read, and I really thoroughly loved it. I didn't read Last Temptation of Christ because it just got boring to me. And I felt like, I think I was gonna read it because everybody wants Christians, like they think Christians are like, oh, I can't read it, it'll make me question my faith. So I was like, I'm gonna read it. But then I got bored of it because I couldn't tell what was historically accurate and what wasn't. So I ended up reading all the non-canonized gospels instead, and did a lot of research, and I just got waylaid with that. And that was around the same time that like Dan Brown blew the caps off the church with the Da Vinci Code, which I love that. Did you know his dad was a mathematician? I know that because my uncle's a mathematician. His dad's a famous, I call them math magicians because it's like magic when they do what they come up with. It doesn't make any rational sense to a brain like me. I'm very not logical left brain. But Dan Brown's series, really, I loved it. I even got Origins. I bought it for my uncle for Christmas a while back. I love his Robert Langdon character. He's like, it's almost like how Neil Gaiman wrote Shadow, like almost like a personality devoid thing that you can just inject your own characteristics that you want him to have into it. It's not like I don't know, there's no descriptors in it. He's just there, and then he sees a thing, and then he feels a thing, and then he moves on to another thing. There's no, like, in-depth, I don't know. Sometimes that can be kind of frustrating, but when there's so much information packed into a novel, it's kind of a relief to not have to know whether or not he's right or left-footed, or something like that, or whether his dad was nice. You know, I really enjoyed it. It helped me wrestle with my faith and, like, learn some stuff about my religion that I didn't know. And I ended up going really far back into Christianity, well, Judaism, and how Judaism back in Mesopotamia, before it was Judaism, and it was the Sumerians and I want to say the Akkadians. I'm wrong. But there was a lot of stuff being developed. This was back with like the tales of, well, before the Gilgamesh story of the flood. Anyway, it made me go that far into it because, like, learning about something that I had just accepted all my life as being true, and then being confronted with the options that maybe it isn't, and then having to find ways around that. But then also, I like to, when I learn about things like that, things that make me question I like to put my faith aside, and I set it aside so that I can learn what another person's origins theory is, like like the fact that Moses, you can't find any history of Moses outside of the Bible. Like, it's almost impossible. And so when I'm reading these like historic accounts from Egyptians, and I'm like, y'all didn't like talk about anything I was hoping to hear about. It's like, that'll frustrate you and make you not want to do it. So I like to take my personal ideals aside and say this is true while I'm reading it, and then I can come back with questions later. But in the meantime, you're never going to get through it if you don't, like, that was something my comparative religion teacher taught me. He was like, while we study these individual religions, believe them. In this class, for this hour, believe the religion. Just accept it as a truth, like you're being taught this as a 4-year-old. And then you can come back and argue it or question it or go back to your faith. But in the meantime, it's disingenuous to come with your own quote-unquote enlightened sense of being. So I really like that. It was, Da Vinci Code was a fascinating read. It really was. I want to read Native American stories. I want to read, like, I don't know. I need to get into that because I'm learning about the Aztecs, and I'm learning about the Mayans and the Incans and all the other ones. I know. I need to find some of them. I'm always torn because, like, yeah, I want to learn them, but, you know, I really, and this is going to be impossible, but I really want to learn some first accounts from Aboriginals in Australia and what their origins were, like what their origin stories are, what their hero epics are. I need to find some of them because I've read some Australian literature, but most of it is from the white folks writing. Actually, all of it. It's almost never from the perspective of the people that have been there this whole time. And I know that they didn't believe in writing things down. I know that they believed in memorization. They had the African-esque idea where it was taking the soul of a thing out to write it down. So they had people that were specifically, their job was to have these stories memorized, which isn't new to them. Like that, it's not a new idea. That we had Homer's The Odyssey was an oratory exercise. That's why it opens up with like "Speak through me, Muse," because they used to memorize it and recite it. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. What else? Macbeth. That was lit. Anything by not anything by Shakespeare, but anything with Macbeth as a main character. If it's a series, if it's a novel, I'll watch it, I'll read it, I'll devour it. I love it. There was, oh my gosh, there's a Bollywood film that's done, it's so bad, but it's so good. It's very like, we're fighting, but we're in love, but we're fighting, maybe she'll kiss me. It was so good, but it was done with Macbeth and you know, there was a lot of nudity. I thought they were a little bit more repressed than that. They're less repressed than we are, apparently. Oh yeah, that actually made me think of another book in a completely different region, but it was called Birds Without Wings, and it's an Afghan story during, I want to say the 70s. I want to say that's when it was, but it's probably, I mean, it starts earlier, but there's a character I think later on in life that's kind of like parallels the stories, but it starts way earlier in the Ottoman, back when it was Ottoman Empire. And I remember the first lines of the book were something to the effect of, when God wants to punish a young woman, he'll give her beauty. Like like when you're born, if he wants to punish you, he'll give you beauty, because beauty is the most punishable sin for a woman to possess. It's not a gift. And when I read that, I was a very vain young person, so I didn't really get that until later on in life, now that I've kind of settled down and I'm pretty comfortable with myself. I'm not like trying to be insta hot anymore. And when I see women that are, you know, attractive, and I hear the stories of the way that people treated them all their lives, like women that are far more beautiful than I ever was, and the fact that it's like a constant challenge for them, being a beautiful woman and not being assaulted and not being harassed and not being sexualized at an early age, it rings very true. But that novel, it was like, there were so many parts of it, but it's like, it's again with a woman's perspective, but there's male characters and it's from their perspective too. And it's, you know, one of them's a young soldier and he's fighting in the war, and it explains how even when you think that you accept death, nobody actually believes they're gonna die. So it's a very false promise to say you're willing to die for your motherland. I don't know. Oh, that's another one I read. Okay, there's a book. It's a hard one. The audiobook is read by Stefan Molyneux, and it's Moleneaux is his last name. He's a little bit frustrating. I first heard about him from Dan Carlin, who does this hardcore histories podcast. He does 6-hour-long podcasts, and it goes into so many. Oh my gosh. I feel like I'll listen to it, and I'll be in it, and I'll learn everything, and then I could start over again and learn all kinds of new stuff. Like, get on him. He is the best. But he had either talked about Stefan Molyneux, because he does psychohistorian stuff, where it's breaking down the psychological components of a leader or of an era, and kind of saying, like, well, what if Winston Churchill was sober? What if Alexander the Great was sober? What if he wasn't drunk all the time? Like Macedonians, apparently they were like super lush. What if Hitler didn't have methamphetamines? Stuff like that. Like, you know, how did these affect world history? And anyway, that's got nothing to do with the book. But Stefan Molyneux, while he's got a lot of really screwed up perspectives that I don't like, I still appreciate him in the way that he speaks and the way that he has some good things that he says. Like, he has some good perspectives that I'd never heard before, like quote-unquote peaceful parenting, which this book is mostly about. It's called A History of War and Child Abuse. It's a rough one. And it equates the rearing of the children to the war that those children eventually will be fighting in. So, and it goes through all different regions. It's not in any way particular to just Eurocentric or anything like that. It's like, it starts, I think the first examples is Germany, and how in the 1900s Germany, women were brutalized pretty heavily. Maids, you know, housemaids and housekeepers were expected to be sexualized and, you know, assaulted, and the wives were assaulted, and by way of being assaulted by this brutal domestic situation, they formed an inability to attach themselves to their children, so they would brutalize their children. It'd be like a trickle-down effect of abuse, and this children would never really they would compartmentalize it as a child would, but they would never really feel the mother's love towards them. They just felt like they had an obligation to earn the mother's love. And then when the mother would have a miscarriage or one of her children would die, that would be the first time that these young people during this really brutal time in history would be able to identify their mother as somebody who loves them. So later, when 1940s comes around, 1920s comes around, and they're recruiting these young men, one of the catchphrases is, you know, we're going to die for our motherland. And that's really kind of connected to it, because that's the only way to get your mother to love you, is to die. So it's very psychosomatic. Some of it's both, you know, some of it's just like a reach, and you can determine for yourself what is and what isn't. But it goes into like the sexual exploitation of children in Papua New Guinea, and how that's affecting the men of that region. And it goes into in Germany, of course I'm biased, like I'm going to learn about Germany more than any other thing that I heard in that podcast, or I mean in that book. But it talks about the enemas that they used to do to children, and it was a really brutal thing that they did, and that kind of linked into the purity complex that Germans had during that era, where that was like another battle cry to get people to join. But another thing this book kind of gave me a perspective on is, like, we in America and in England, I think, and, you know, in a lot of places, a lot of the first world countries are in an era of the seventh cycle, they call it, or the third generation, which every third generation goes to war. And this is the same rhetoric that Germany used in the 1910s, 1920s, America used during pre-Vietnam, and a lot of other countries use the same. It's almost like a script, where they say this generation's weak, they're soft, they're poets, they're dreamers, they have no ambition, they have no drive, they need something to fight for, they need to go to war, they need to toughen up. And it's something that I've been hearing people freaking say a lot lately, which, you know, when my son wanted you know, he was like talking about the military, I was like, no, your kids can join. I don't want you to join, because I read this book, so I don't know. Join the military, serve your country. You're a better person than me if you do. But yeah, it ties that in, and the end of the book is like, you start to get this hopeless feeling of like this endless cycle of abuse and misery, and nobody's going to get out of this, because every time we start to heal from whatever the wars have caused in our passed down curses, generational curses and everything, once we start to heal from it, then we're weak again, and they need another war to get us to be the greatest generation again. So it's like, well, what do we do? And the end of this book, it talks about peaceful parenting, teaching your children to be compassionate, rational-minded people. Stop yelling. Stop beating your child. Punishment's fine, as long as it's within reason. And it talks about how the psychological makeup of our young children can prevent the next war if we... So I don't know, it gave me a focus, it gave me a drive. And I'm clearly not a peaceful... I'm a holler. I yell. I can't whisper. I sound like I learned to whisper in a helicopter. I can't get away with nothing. So when I get mad, I just get mad. I need therapy. But this book really helped bring home some thoughts. So that was a really hard and interesting read. And I'm at, 50 minutes almost? I need to stop. I could talk about books all day. I haven't been reading anything that I can review. Trying to think of one more to give you guys before I call it a night. Let's see. What's the stupidest book I've read that I liked? Amish Vampires in Space. I was looking for books about Amish people, and I found that and totally forgot about why I wanted to learn about Amish people. I'm not even going to say anything. That's it. That's what you need to find. If you take nothing else from this, find that book. Okay. Thanks. Bye.